I told you there was a lot that happened in chapter 7, and there's so much. I have a lot to talk with you about. One of the first things I want to bring up is Gatsby's reaction when he sees Daisy's baby for the first time. I feel like this changes everything for him because it's his first real grip with reality. When he's at a party, or when Daisy's in his house and Tom's not there, or even when Tom's there but the baby's not, it's easy to pretend that none of it ever happened and it's all fake. But Daisy's baby is a very real representation of Daisy's current reality. She represents everything that Gatsby just lost, that he can't get back. Especially, I think, when Daisy's baby starts asking where her dad is. That's a rough reality check for Gatsby, which I think intensifies his desire to just kind of move things along and do something about it. He can't just sit back and just ignore it because reality's staring at him in the face. Another section that I thought was interesting in my book is on page 124. It says, the relentless beating heat was beginning to confuse me, and I had a bad moment there before I realized that so far his suspicions hadn't alighted on Tom. We're talking here about Wilson and his looking on Tom and Myrtle and everything that they're doing. He had discovered that Myrtle had some sort of life apart from him in another world, and the shock made him physically sick. I stared at him and then at Tom, who had made a parallel discovery less than an hour before, and it occurred to me that there was no difference between men in intelligence or race so profound as the difference between the sick and the well. I like this because it's a first realization for me that Tom and Wilson are the exact same. That when you strip away money, when you strip away where you live and your position in society, the biggest thing and the only thing that you can take with you really in the end is your relationships. And in this case, both of them have totally screwed it up. Wilson's got a wife who is off with Tom, Tom's got a wife who's off with Gatsby, and so both of them are in this kind of rotten position. Now, whether or not it was forced upon them, whether or not they deserve it, that's for you to decide. But it does definitely put them on equal footing, and I think that's a very important lesson for Tom, as we see at the end of the chapter. We'll get to that in just a little bit. The most important discussion for me comes on page, at least in my book, it's on page 132. This is when I realized that Daisy really just has absolutely no idea who she is anymore. In a very hero from Much Ado About Nothing kind of way, she spent her entire life with men telling her what to think and where to go and what to do, and as a result, she really just doesn't know what she wants. So she has to make a decision, and this is what the boys are trying to force her to do. Tom and Gatsby both just want her to decide, and she's having a hard time with that. In fact, Gatsby asks her to tell the truth, but she doesn't really know what that is. It says, she hesitated, her eyes fell on Jordan and me with a sort of appeal, as though she realized at last what she was doing, and as though she had never all along intended to do anything at all, but it was done now. It was too late. So she's doing this in ignorance, not really realizing the consequences, because why should she? She's never had to face them before. She says, I never loved him, she said, but with perceptible reluctance. So she's saying that she never loved Tom, but she doesn't really seem to believe it. And then Tom starts saying, well, what about this and what about this? Which is when my heart really does start to ache for him, even though he's being a little bit of a jerk himself. He is, after all, having an affair of his own, so he's a little bit of a hypocrite. But you do kind of, I don't know, the way that F. Scott Fitzgerald, I actually do kind of feel for him a little bit. Especially when he says, not the day I carried you down from the punch bowl to keep your shoes dry. There was a husky tenderness in his tone. Daisy? And so there's a little bit of a, well, maybe Tom actually does love her. If he really does love her, then why is he off with Myrtle? And if Daisy really loves Tom, then why is she off with Gatsby? Why are they both trying to reclaim something that can't exist or shouldn't exist or doesn't even exist anymore? Why are they living this way? And then Gatsby, or she says to Gatsby, I did love him once, but I loved you too. And so there's this Daisy being caught in the middle thing where both of the men want her to choose one or the other, but she really can't, because she did love Gatsby before she loved Tom. But then Gatsby left, and now she loves Tom, and she can't treat them both the same way anymore. And their baby is a very real realization of that, particularly when Tom says that there are things between Daisy and him that Gatsby just, that he can't have, and the baby is a very real representation of that. Now, on to the Tom situation. I find Tom a very frustrating character in the end, in some ways more frustrating than really anybody in the book, because he does do some very real things that are very wrong, that you can't even really argue are wrong. Daisy, too, for that matter, but he's off having this affair. He's mad at Daisy for having one, when really, if he were being fair about it, and then it would be like, okay, well, if you're going to have one, I'm going to have one, then I guess we can both just be immoral together. But in the end, it seems like Tom really has this kind of turnaround, especially after he sees Wilson, and then after Myrtle's kind of tragic death, and well, not kind of tragic death, but after that tragic death, Tom steps forward as Wilson's advocate, which I find really kind of fascinating. He picks up, the description is that he picks up Wilson like a doll and carries him back to the office, sets him down on a chair, and comes back. So he very clearly is kind of taking care of Wilson and trying to make sure that he's okay in Myrtle's death. So suddenly they've really become equals, just like they were described at the beginning of the chapter. So very, very interesting. And then at the end, Nick observes that both Tom and Daisy are not happy. They don't touch the chicken or the ale that they're eating for dinner, but they're not unhappy either. There's an unmistakable air of natural intimacy about the picture, and anybody would have said they were conspiring together. So it seems like the tragic events of the day, as awful and as unnecessary as they were, really have kind of woken both Daisy and Tom up to the reality of their life and encouraged them to grow up a little bit. The picture seems, at least to me, to suggest that both Tom and Daisy are moving on, that they're learning to grow up. Gatsby can't. He's standing at the edge of the dock, watching over nothing, is the last part of the chapter, because the light goes out and Daisy is 100% no longer available to him. So pretty big chapter. Gatsby is still stuck. Daisy and Tom seem to have moved on and moved forward, and now we get to find out what happens as the result of these actions in the last 2 chapters of the book.